We are here today to deliberate, discuss on how India can design a sustainable growth model, a model that delivers economic prosperity and social justice for all, the model that delivers well-being and higher quality of life for the present and future generations. Economic growth does not by itself constitute well-being and happiness. Economic development, even if it is inclusive and equitable, is only one of the contributing factors that cater to the quest for happiness. Many other factors come into play. Ask any man, why is he working every day? And he would say, it is to earn money. You ask him further, why do you want to earn money? He says, I want to earn money to make a living. You ask him, why do you want to make a living? He would say, for my well-being and happiness. Hence, well-being and happiness are the driving forces for every human being. It may start with well-being and happiness for oneself, or well-being and happiness extended to one's own family, society, country, and the whole world. The growth of individual citizens is definitely an indicator of nation's growth. It's through balanced physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, social, and environmental well-being that one can experience happiness. Just as my friend said, Ram said, we need to change our perception of self, not simply the bodily self, but a higher sense of self. An integrated, balanced development in all these areas of human personality defines sustainable growth. Imbalanced growth in any one of these domains at the cost of the other domain will never be sustainable. Since the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution in July 2012 declaring an International Day of Happiness, more and more countries are trying to seek practical ways to incorporate happiness and well-being in the context of sustainable development. The new concept and approach will not only be a feature of sustainable development, but also the future of a sustainable world we may want to live in. I firmly believe that well-being and happiness must remain at the heart of an inclusive, equitable, and balanced economic growth. And in my opinion, it should be India's future model for attaining sustainable growth. A legal code of Bhutan states that there is no purpose for the government if it cannot create decade. The phrase used is decade, or happiness for its people. The King of Bhutan, in 1972, enunciated the philosophy of gross national happiness, GNH. GNH is nothing but an alternative development paradigm established on the belief that happiness can be achieved by balancing the needs of the body with those of the mind with a peaceful environment. When we are talking about sustainable growth model, the first thing is to measure where we stand now with respect to our vision of well-being and happiness. Let us look at the scenario in India. The 2015 Global Hunger Index report has ranked India 20th with a GHI score of 29, considered a serious situation, among nations with escalating hunger issues. The World Bank's report, Health, Nutrition, and Population, has clearly stated that the prevalence of underweight children in India is among the highest in the world and is nearly double that of the sub-Saharan Africa. According to World Happiness Report 2016, published by Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN, a global initiative of the United Nations, India has been ranked 118th in the list, down one slot from last year on the index. The report said that India was among the group of 10 countries witnessing the biggest happiness declines, along with Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Yemen, Botswana. It is shocking that India comes below Somalia, China, Pakistan, Iran, Palestinian territories, and Bangladesh in the aspect of decline in happiness. The report takes into account GDP per capita, life expectancy, social support, and freedom to make life choices as indicators of happiness. Though this report is calls happiness report, I would say it is a basic wellness report and not about happiness. Happiness rides on the shoulders of minimum level of well-being. Where is a question of happiness when well-being of even a hunger-free life is not guaranteed? Credit Suisse Global Wealth Data Book 2014 declares India's richest 10% holds 370 times the share of wealth than what the poorest hold. This is the degree of economic divide in India. The divorce rate in India was just 1 in 1,000 10 years ago, as compared to the US average of 500 per 1,000. Family courts officials say the number of divorce applications has doubled and even tripled in cities such as Mumbai, Delhi, Bengaluru, Calcutta, and Lucknow over the past 5 years. So with regard to unhappiness in married life, we are quickly catching up with the West. Such is the increasing level of unhappiness in India. Such is the proliferation of dissatisfaction in Indian citizens. Such is the starvation, increasing divide between the haves and the have-nots. No doubt, the condition of unhappiness and economic divide will always exist in society. That cannot be stopped. I'm only making an observation that the direction in which we are moving is towards the increasing level of unhappiness. What model of growth should India adopt? Should we blindly follow the Western model? Let us see what the Western model has delivered since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, little more than 2 centuries ago. Let us not be in illusion about how much the Western model of growth has scored in producing wellness and happiness for life on Earth. Rather, the evidence is their model of growth and development has put the planet in trouble. Rainforests are victim of lumber and meat industries. Millions of acres are cleared and stripped annually. In industrialized nations, a typical resident uses 10 times more steel, 12 times more fuel, and 15 times more paper than a typical resident in a developing nation. This also leads to proportionately huge mountains of garbage dumps being generated. And the trash is burned, poisonous heavy metals go into the air. When trash is burned, is buried in the landfills, the heavy metals like lead, nickel, mercury, chromium, and cadmium, which have poisonous effects on humans, often migrate into human drinking water. To keep profits high, fertilizers and pesticides industries market their products with the enticement of high production for the growers at the cost of eventually damaging the soil. Pesticides which have been banned as toxic in certain industrialized countries continue to be manufactured by them and unscrupulously exported to other countries. Motor vehicles are the biggest source of toxic air pollution. A study of World Health Organization and United Nations Environment Program show that 2/3 of the world's urban population breathe polluted air. Traveling a whole day exposing oneself to Mumbai's roads can pollute your lungs as much as smoking 10 cigarettes can. Acid rains are caused by factories that burn coal and oil, in addition to the effluents from motor vehicles. Industries have emitted excessive carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, causing excessive danger to the Earth's atmosphere, leading to global warming. About 75% of the carbon dioxide entering the Earth's atmosphere each year comes from burning fossil fuels and motor vehicles. United Nations studies show that the global warming could raise sea levels. If levels rise by just 1 meter, it could mean submerging 5 million square kilometers of lands, lowlands, and these lowlands constitute 1/3 of the world's cropland. For several decades, scientists have discussed the pros and cons of this issue and have finally come to a consensus that global warming is a fact and the rising sea levels remain a threat. Most environmental problems such as global warming are so expansive that even national governments are unable to confront them alone. Despite collective efforts by United Nations, the environmental crisis deepens. The rainforests continue to be lost, the number of extinct and endangered species only increase, large-scale mechanized agriculture operating with chemical fertilizers and pesticides destroy the planet's cultivable land. No safe method of disposing toxic and nuclear wastes have been found. Problems of global warming and pollution have compelled nations to conclude that drastic measures are required. These environmental crises has arisen from reckless and mindless excessive consumption of natural resources by man. This is caused by man's greed. It is very clear that if the Western model of growth and development is blindly pursued by India, we would also become responsible for aggravating the environmental crisis. Overconsumption has been clearly identified by scientists, religionists, politicians, environmentalists as the biggest cause for environmental crisis the world is facing today. The solution lies only in influencing large number of people to change their values towards voluntary simplicity of lifestyle. Spirituality can play a major role in creating value systems that will reduce consumption and stop this environmental degradation. World Watch Institute, based in Washington, D.C., turns out well-documented reports on environment. This has become a standard reference for government officials, educators, journalists around the world. The World Watch Institute has also recognized the need for spiritually oriented solutions that influence man to cultivate the ethics of frugality and spiritual sources of satisfaction. There seems to be a consensus that we have to do something to cut down the proportion of damage we are doing to the environment. However, this brings before us a real conflict, a conflict arising from working against individuals' uncontrolled desire for accumulating wealth through manufacturing, mechanized agriculture, trade, banking, finance, etc. A conflict with the conviction that a nation's strength is measured only by the growth of its industrial capacity. A conflict with consumer mentality, which identifies happiness with the ability to acquire through high-paying jobs more and more material possessions. It's an impossible situation. On the one hand, we want a clean, healthy environment. On the other, we want extravagant standards of life that inevitably result in environmental degradation. A number of thoughtful people have, however, recognized this dilemma and proposed solutions. Solutions that call for fundamental transformations in human consciousness, in the direction of simple living and pursuit of non-material satisfaction of happiness of higher selves. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna describes the destructive civilization, this kind of destructive civilization based on maximizing exploiting of matter. Bhagavad Gita in chapter 16, verse 8, 9 and 11. Asatyam apratishtamte jagad ahur anishwaram aparaspara sambhutam kim anyat kama haitukam etam drishtin avastabhya nastatmano alpabuddhaya prabhavanti ugra karmanaha kshayaya jagato hayitaha chintam apparimeyam cha pralayantim upashitaha kamapo bhoga parama etavididi nischitaha. Meaning, they say that this world is unreal with no foundation, with no God in control. Following such conclusions, the demoniac, who are lost to themselves, who have no intelligence, engage in unbeneficial, horrible acts meant to destroy the world. They believe that to gratify the senses is a prime necessity of human civilization. If the world is ever to become free from the threat of environmental annihilation, we, the Indians, have to go back to our roots, unearth the solutions contained in the source books of knowledge on holistic growth, intuitively revealed by our sages. The formula for building a peaceful, fulfilling civilization that can deliver a high index of well-being and happiness for its citizens. Traditional Indian ethos has 4 dimensions, simultaneous objectives of life, known as Purusharthas. They are Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. The Vedas recognize the world, both animate and inanimate, as a single organism whose parts are interconnected and interdependent. The world is seen as a single family, Vasudhaiva eva kutumbam. Vasudha means the earth or the vast cosmos. Eva means certainly. Kutumbakam means family. When Artha, which is the pursuit of economic growth, and Kama, which is the pursuit of pleasures, are guided by the principles of Dharma, one can optimize short-term and long-term wellness and happiness. Today, the world is playing the game of Artha and Kama for its own sake, largely focused on immediate gains, ignorant of the higher principles and purposes of human life. So it's not at all surprising that that new religion of man, of maximizing exploitation of material resources by mutual competition, is leading to this great crisis. Just like a fever is a symptom of a deeper malfunctioning of the body, the environmental crisis is only an alarming symptom of man's ignorance of higher values and purposes of life. The modern scientific and industrial civilization, which has its origin in the West, recognizes only the laws governing gross material nature accessible to the 5 gross senses. According to the Vedic ethos, this is an incomplete picture of reality and the laws governing reality. Over and above the laws of gross material nature, sages of India have discovered subtle laws of dharma and karma, the laws that operate on humanity in the matter of well-being and happiness, which has direct relevance to our subject of sustainable growth. They not only discovered these laws, but also built a culture of life based on these principles. A culture that delivers a high index of well-being and happiness. A culture of papa and punya. A culture of yoga, meaning to be connected to the whole absolute sentient being. Only traces of this culture can be found in India today due to the centuries of foreign invasions. And whatever traces remain are swiftly being replaced by Western materialistic culture. These subtle laws of nature are as real as the laws of physics, but pertain to the domain of human action and reaction. It pertains to man's responsibility for his actions in relationship with himself, with others, and with the world. The Vedas recognize man's unique ability to experience higher dimensions of existential truth, knowledge, and happiness, called Satchit Ananda. Artha, pursuit of economic growth, and Kama, pursuit of pleasure, are secondary external existential objectives of life, meant for a primary goal of life of spiritual development. These are meant to be pursued within the perimeters of dharma in order to balance short-term and long-term happiness for the multi-layered individual comprising of spiritual self, intellectual self, emotional self, and physical self. Exactly as Mr. Ram said, dharma is about balance, balancing the different aspects of human self. Dharma, or the rules of the game of life, are found in the Vedas. The design principles of universal organism, being the most complex, is incomprehensible to any one man's tiny brain. Just as a user of a supercomputer is not expected to understand why it works the way it works and why it sometimes does not work the way we want. Only the designer of the supercomputer and a few others will understand. The users, who are majority, have to go by the user manual prepared by the designer. India is in possession of this important user manual of sustainable life. However, it is not the product of a mere mechanistic model. It is a product that is derived from both mechanistic and humanistic model that respects the needs and the right to life of every living entity on earth, including animals. For those who want to go beyond the manual of life to know the deeper science of existence from which the user manual is prepared, it is available in Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta, Upanishads, etc. We cannot afford to be intellectually lazy. To do justice to each of ourselves as Indians, educated, who can independently think, we have to invest energy patiently trying to understand the worldview, Vasudeva Iva Kutumbakam, the principles of dharma, the subtle laws of karma. The essence of dharma as described in the Vedic literature is very simple. It stands on 4 pillars. The 4 pillars of dharma are truthfulness, satya, integrity or cleanliness of relationship called saucham, sacrifice called tapas, and compassion called daya. The injunctive part of dharma, of do's and don'ts, are only secondary dharma. It is a challenge and responsibility of the thinkers and governments to design the details of such a model suited to the present times and context, guided by these 4 principles, and not blindly adopt the secondary dharmas of do's and don'ts created for a different time, place, and circumstance, which make it appear dogmatic and impractical. Today, we see that a majority of those who are economically well off, the upcoming middle class, are not seeking higher quality of life beyond eating, sleeping, sex, defending, and social status, clearly following the model of the West. In fact, they are not even aware that such an option is available to them as human beings, an option to inquire into life itself, athato brahma jijnasa. They are getting trapped by the commercial advertising industry which gives them a false sense of progressive life by simply increasing their so-called need for more and more consumer goods. Thus, they are driven to work harder, to earn more to meet the newly created needs, which their parents lived without. Starkly contrasting is how the have-nots do not even have the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter and healthcare, a serious anomaly of growth. 4th century philosopher Saint Augustine said, "A habit, if not resisted, soon becomes a necessity." Mahatma Gandhi said, "The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed." Chanakya Niti says, "No blessing is bigger than peace, no joy is bigger than contentment. There is no religion bigger than mercy. For a man, greed is a worst disease." The middle class, who are today becoming economically well situated, should seek higher non-material spiritual satisfaction in life through cultivation of self-knowledge, humility, sacrifice, love, and compassion, based on the understanding that our temporary bodies are all eternal, based on the understanding that beyond our temporary bodies, we are all eternal, sentient part and parcels of one sentient absolute truth. When contentment and compassion rises in the individual, greed subsides, consumption decreases, sharing of wealth with those who cannot afford even a life of basic well-being will happen. The burden on Earth's resources will automatically decrease. This cascading positive effect can be achieved only by transforming human consciousness and not merely by new technologies. What is a concrete model for sustainable growth of wellness and happiness? The solution does not lie in merely fixing the symptoms of a particular problem like global warming. I will cite an example of how the scientific community decided on a solution to a particular problem, not knowing that they are creating a greater problem. In the Scientific Journal of the Status of Scientific American, in its August 1900 edition, an article was carried on a scientific debate whether to promote or not the development of the then recently discovered horseless carriage, the motor car. Elaborate statistics were quoted as to number of horses and the tonnage of horse dung and urine that were polluting the streets. Their conclusion was that they should go for it, and for reasons ironically that it is to reduce the pollution from horse dung and horse urine in the streets. Today, this very horse carriage or the motor car has become a major source of pollution and global warming. Historian Martin Melosi notes, the generation that first saw automobiles replacing the horses saw cars as miracles of cleanliness. To create a concrete model of sustainable growth is not easy. Let us remember the famous definition of insanity. Insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting a different result. Just as it is not easy to turn around a sick industry, it requires understanding of current reality, it requires new vision. If we have to turn around the life on earth to make it sustainable, we need to do all that we need to turn around a sick industry. Current reality of life on earth is becoming sicker day by day, is too obvious today. But we need a new vision of sustainable growth as not merely inclusive economic growth, but holistic growth in well-being and happiness of its citizens based on a new self-perception of individual as not only being his bodily self with aspirations for bodily well-being and pleasures, but also having higher self of mental, intellectual, spiritual with loftier aspirations for progress. Just as in a family, the first need is to meet the basic well-being for all its members, starting with food. Towards this end, the entire family shares the fruits of their work. The principle of individual striving coexists with the principle of sacrifice and compassion and benevolence towards less fortunate ones in the family by the more fortunate ones. This is India's situation today. If the consciousness of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is infused in the society through spiritual transformation, especially in the minds of the rich, the demand on natural resources will decrease through the spirit of sharing and will lead to reduced consumption. Swami Prabhupada, spiritual leader, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, boldly declared in 60s that Western civilization is largely a mere polished animal civilization on four wheels, as the objective of life seems only to eat, sleep, mate, defend in a polished way. He urged the leaders to bring about human transformation to higher values of life. Let us heed his advice and not make India duplicate the Western model of growth along with all its allied problems. I would like to close now with a few words on Akshaya Patra. The Akshaya Patra program began by feeding midday meals to 1,500 government school children in the year 2000 to support education. Even before the cooked midday meal was announced by the Government of India in the year 2004. Today, we have sustained a growth of feeding 1.5 million children every day. The meal that is provided by Akshaya Patra is an enhanced meal, and only about 60% is subsidized by the government. The balance of 40% is sustained by donations. Even today, Akshaya Patra does not have a corpus fund to back it. Yet, year after year, the program has proved that faith in the virtue of collective compassion and benevolence ignited in the hearts of the rich is a real corpus which has sustained its financial needs for 16 years. Thus, Akshaya Patra has been an instrument in giving a sense of fulfillment to both the haves and the have-nots by acting as a bridge between them. We at Akshaya Patra believe that feeding a hungry child is not a charity, but a social obligation. Akshaya Patra has also proved the efficacy of a public-private partnership to address one of the social problems in this country, namely hunger in classrooms. Further, Akshaya Patra has demonstrated through its well-established platform of accountability and responsibility that it is able to attract partnership from several corporates in the form of corporate social responsibility. I express my heartfelt appreciation to the organizers of this conclave for giving me an opportunity to share a few thoughts on the vision of sustainable growth. This event presents us the opportunity to reflect on the perpetual theme of crafting India's sustainability growth model. A little differently, when the world is having an epiphany and jointly awaking to the hunger of a new development paradigm. Let India take the lead for a more balanced, holistic, equitable, and sustainable socio-economic development. Happiness may sometimes begin with a smile, but its pursuit is a solemn and a collective endeavor that must succeed for the sake of everyone and everything that exists on earth presently and in the future. Thank you very much.